Today I'm sitting down with Gloria La Riva, one of the third-party candidates for President of the United States, running as a socialist representing the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Gloria has a decades-long history of political activism, from immigrant rights to the LGBTQ struggle, with dozens of political arrests to prove it. Gloria's political work has gone far beyond the borders of the U.S., leading many solidarity delegations to Cuba and Venezuela and war-torn regions of Iraq and Yugoslavia. Thank you so much for joining me, Gloria.
Thank you, Abby, for having me.
So you're running for president. How is that possible? I haven't seen you in the debates. I haven't seen you on corporate media. What's going on?
Well, that's because the elections in the United States are a rigged system. And they're not about to let a socialist candidate like myself appear on TV to challenge what Hillary Clinton and Trump have been saying.
Mm-hmm. You know, oddly enough, Gary Johnson and the Libertarian Party is the only third party that is actually on all 50 states' ballots for this election. Talk about how restrictive ballot access is, what you had to go through to get your name on several of these states' ballots.
Yeah, most people don't realize that every state has its own requirements for how a party will appear. And in many places it's almost impossible. But we are reaching out beyond the balloted states that we're on. We're getting, we have a lot of writing campaigns too, and we're on the ballot in 8 states.
8 states right now. Which states are those?
California.
Mm-hmm.
I won the nomination of Peace and Freedom Party along with Dennis Banks, my vice presidential candidate. New Mexico, Colorado, Iowa, Washington State, Vermont, nominated by the Liberty Union Party, which used to be Bernie Sanders' party, Louisiana, and Florida. We had been on the ballot the last 2 elections, but this year, in the middle of the campaign, the Secretary of State ruled us and other third-party ballot candidates off the ballot. So we're in the middle of a struggle to try to keep that ballot status. But you see, you can win ballot access, but you don't necessarily keep it.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the tenets of your campaign. You have a 10-point program. This leaked audio recording of Hillary Clinton just came out where she's mocking Bernie Sanders supporters for calling for free education and free health care, 2 notions that are fundamentally accepted across most of the industrialized countries in the world. These are 2 constitutional rights that you're calling for in the program, Gloria. Why is this something not to be mocked?
Well, you said something very important. You said in industrial countries that they are rights, education and health care. And I think it shows the extreme control that the corporations and the media has in presenting the United States as the model for economic well-being of the people, when in fact we don't have the right to health care. And we say that not only should health care be a right, it should be free, not just for people who are a citizen or even permanent residents, but for everyone, the undocumented as well. That no one should have to pay a penny for it. That education should be free from preschool all the way through graduate school. How does that get accomplished? Well, simply by dismantling the Pentagon budget, which is a system of pure destruction, war, occupation, sanctions, and use it instead for creating the education that we need, that the world needs too, of having not only health care, but preventive health care. How much lower the cost of health care would be if people could go to the doctor in time. In addition, we also have as a constitutional right that we say should be the right to housing, the right to a roof over your head. And I always point out this example. A construction worker can build a home, a skyscraper, a bridge, a highway. That's a great skill. And they can work to build a skyscraper, all the things we're seeing in San Francisco and New York. When the work is done and there's a downturn in the economy and you lose your job or the paychecks don't extend beyond a few months of unemployment, you're homeless. And you can sleep in the doorway of the very building you built. That's capitalism. And so we say all of the labor of the people, whether it's a teacher, a scientist, a doctor, a janitor, a restaurant worker, a construction worker, the wealth of society should be owned in common by the people, and that we decide together where that wealth is used.
You're saying you want to dismantle the empire. oh my God, that's unheard of. I mean, how would we defend ourselves? Aren't these bases all over the world to protect the U.S.?
The American people believe that it's hard to let go of the concept of defense, as if we are ringed by countries and people threatening us. But in fact, I think if we were able to see the Empire Files on national television, and if the people were able to see the destruction of countries, of whole peoples, that I have seen myself traveling to Iraq, Yugoslavia, and elsewhere, they would be shocked, and they would be reviled at this, and they would immediately put a stop to it themselves. The literally millions of people who've been killed by U.S. wars and occupation sanctions. And there is no country threatening us. There is no people threatening us. They want peace. And we say always, the road to peace in the Middle East is for the U.S. to get out. The troops who are abroad, hundreds of thousands in maybe 800 military bases that we know of, if they came home and could help rebuild the country, go to school, then also be part of the brigades that go to other countries to learn of the culture, to share in the culture, and help truly rebuild the countries. What a world we would have of peace. And so, yes, we say without a doubt, dismantle the Pentagon and all the nuclear weapons. I think the only Pentagon budget that should remain is the care for the veterans.
Yeah, from all the destruction we've already caused to them.
Yes.
You know, I think it's $1 trillion that Obama just pledged to just upgrade our nuclear arsenal, which I really think says it all when you're going to need that much investment just to maintain this absurd amount of nuclear weapons that we have. I mean, it's just shocking. Gloria, your campaign also calls for the right to work as a constitutional right, 100% full employment. How would that be possible? Well, we are told by economists in the U.S. that if you have less than 5%, maybe 4, maybe 3, that's full employment, because not everybody can work. What they also don't count, though, is people who've stopped working, people whose unemployment ran out. And our idea of full employment is that there is so much potential in the working class, including those who are unemployed, to create the jobs that are needed. How much we could gain from children being taken care of by quality child care for free for the parents. And you can imagine how many child care workers we need. Caregivers for seniors. There must be millions of seniors who do not get enough care, who live alone, who need companionship, care, cooking, food, and social exchange with people, community. There is the need for rebuilding the whole infrastructure, not only the roads, highways, bridges, which is important, but the water sources. There has to be a guarantee of an income. That's why we say a guaranteed job or an income, whether in the immediate sense. There are many people who can't work who are disabled. Many people who've been denied disability payments. They need an income. If you don't have a formal employment in a job, there's going to be informal employment that you are forced into. Things that are not healthy for society, but you have to make a living somewhere. That's why full employment must be guaranteed by a socialist system. Everyone's potential can be realized that way. Clinton and Trump are both insanely rich, obviously. You have Hillary Clinton and Obama both being backed completely by Wall Street. Wall Street essentially got them into office with their donations. Trump is Trump. He's a billionaire, billionaire class. His interests are very blatant. Another point on your party program is seizing the banks and putting Wall Street criminals into jail. What a concept. You know, Iceland just did it. Why can't we? You know, what happened? What does that mean? What does seizing the banks mean, and who would take them over? It seems like such a foreign concept. I wanted you to break that down. Well, it's first important to understand where the banks get their wealth from. High interest rates, from, look at Wells Fargo, the millions of false accounts that they created to keep their profits up. They get their money from foreclosing on people's homes
And most recently, the bailout of $800 billion. We're still paying for that through taxpayers' money. We're still paying that through students having to pay these usurious loans. The interest rates are so high, they're not guaranteed to be able to pay that later. So the wealth of the banks is the wealth that we've created, that they have stolen. We say nationalize the banks, create the state banks that the people have the decision on where that money goes. That way you can make education completely free. That way we can completely ban and eliminate the idea of home foreclosures. A home should not be considered as real estate. It must be considered as personal property, the right to a home. And I think people would accept this very heartily if they knew what we meant by nationalizing the banks. Nationalizing our own wealth for social good. Now, as far as the bankers today who refuse to answer one question of where that money went, now, what people may not realize is that hundreds of billions of dollars in drug money, the international drug trafficking, was laundered by U.S. banks. Wachovia, guilty of laundering $378 billion of drug money, and their fine was only 2% of that money. So they are criminal.
I think this is a really important point because it speaks to how the system works. It's kind of a permit for plunder, a permit for pollution. It's worth it for them. It's worth the risk to get slapped with a couple $1 million fine or whatever when they're making a profit of obscene, disproportionate amounts. What does this say about who really runs society? You need $1 billion to even run for president. Of course, these candidates, like I just said, are backed by Wall Street.
We're going to see, I believe, in the next term, presidential term, another collapse, another potential collapse of the financial system, of the banking industry, and they'll come again for handouts and say we need a bailout. This time, I don't think the people will accept it. The heads of the Treasury Department come from the banks themselves. It's extremely corrupt. When you look at oil, for example, or the war manufacturers, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, who don't pay federal taxes. They don't pay taxes, and they're financed by our bonds. The indebtedness still goes back to Vietnam. So it is more than just reform. You cannot reform the capitalist system of the United States anymore. It's impossible. You would have to really take the control of the means of production. Bernie Sanders was asked about that at one point, about what socialism meant. He talked about some of the pillars of socialism, free healthcare, free education. We agree with that very much. But he made it a point to say we don't agree with taking over the means of production. And we say that's the only way that you can transform society to meet the needs of the people. The halls of Congress are filled with lobbyists from all the corporations, from the banks to the oil, to the war manufacturers and everything else you can think of, auto manufacturers, the nuclear industry. They're the ones who write the laws. They're the ones who fill the pockets of the politicians. And they're the ones who carry out the campaign against those politicians if they don't continue those politics. The Koch brothers. It used to be that the billionaires just financed the politicians. Now they run for office.
When people hear Bernie Sanders, and of course he has this massive following, maybe not anymore since he endorsed Hillary so vehemently, but when you say that isn't possible without transferring the means of production over to workers themselves, he would say, and maybe people are confused by this, because he would say, look at these Scandinavian, look at Europe and look at what they've done, this hybrid system where they've been able to produce this for their people while still maintaining a capitalist structure. What would you respond with?
Most of those countries are now engaged in cutbacks of those programs. They are also, we're seeing strife in those countries of strikes by the workers who are seeing their benefits, their retirement cut, and their retirement age extended. So you see struggle developing now because over time, capital always takes control over the social programs that may have existed in capitalist countries, unless the workers keep fighting to defend them. But you can't keep going on like that. In the United States, the reforms that we saw in the 1930s of Social Security, unemployment insurance, the welfare programs, all the things, union rights, they're being eroded greatly because we're still in a capitalist country where over time the corporations will always try to take back all their wealth.
You're not a billionaire. You're an average person. You're in the working class. You've been rooted in the working class your whole life, Gloria. Very different economic background than these people that we're talking about now. What have you done in your life for work, and what do you do now?
Well, I'm of a Mexican-American family. My mother's from Mexico. She had the typical jobs of a Mexican immigrant, seamstress in sweatshops, a waitress, cleaning homes, maid, hotel maid. And my father was a letter carrier, so we were a family of 6 kids. And from very early on, with our family of limited means, I learned that you had to work to have money. So I used to iron for middle-class families, like dozens of men's shirts. That was before permanent press. My first real job working for a company was as a waitress at 16. I groomed horses in several racetracks. And I've been a secretary. I became a typesetter when I was in my early 20s. And for the last 35 years, I worked at the San Francisco Chronicle. But I've always worked all my life, and I will have to work longer because I don't even own a home. I'm a renter. Mm-hmm. And I think, typical of many working class people. And it can always go away. I have built up all these years a pension in my union. And because of the financial crisis of 2008, our pension's value dropped from 1.3 billion to 650 million, half. So everything that was calculated for our retirement of our members has been cut in half. And the calculation is that our pension may not last 15 years. But that's true of dozens of other pensions. It's the fault of the whole financial economic system of the United States. The workers work all their lives, if you're even lucky to have a pension, to see it disappear.
That's one of the most criminal things, I think, of this entire economy, is that pensions, that you just said it, you could work your entire life and they could just be gone.
Yes.
And of course, all of this is projected as the union's fault. We need to, more right-to-work states and less unionizing. It's like, what are you talking about? These are the only people that can protect these things. What can even be done at that point? You said the pension got cut in half. What can the union even do? You're president of your union.
Well, I just regret what's happened because I used to always tell my workers, we have the union pension. And then when this took place in 2008, because all pensions are tied up in the stock market, it's a casino, it's like gambling. That's why people go on strike, to fight for future workers, not just for themselves. Unionists and union workers and the unions themselves have a vision for the working class. But it's an uphill battle under capitalism. And then, like I said, you win a reform and it can go away by the capitalists saying, you have to pay for that.
I'm astounded by how many times you've been arrested. You've been embedded in so many struggles. What was your radicalizing moment?
Well, despite being poor and experiencing racism as a child, the discrimination of society, I believed in the capitalist system because it was like, we have more things. We're richer than other countries, even though we were poor. The illusion of capitalism that most people grow up under. And I applied to several schools, but I had no money to go to college. A young woman came into my school in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and she told some of us, apply at Brandeis University. There's money there. So I applied, and I got a virtually full scholarship, 96% coverage for 4 years. I got to school, and I thought, well, my studies did well. It paid off. I made it. And I got to school, and the Black and Latino student groups said, we saw your application. you're a goody two-shoes. We're going to tell you how you got to school. They said, we took over the campus. And that was 1968, 4 years before I went to school. There was a wave of student uprisings, shutting down universities for ethnic studies. San Francisco State shut down for 5 months. Brandeis, Columbia, an untold number of students went on strike in this country and against the Vietnam War, against injustice. I was a beneficiary of that. The Black and Latino students won an amazing affirmative action program at Brandeis. And they even won the right for students to fly to other cities to look for kids like me. That's how I got into school. So my year in school became the greatest education. I learned of collective action.
Hillary has said she's a feminist candidate. In fact, her entire campaign has been kind of centered around how this is some monumental achievement for women. Hillary Clinton becoming president. As a woman of color running for president against Hillary, what's your response?
I was in Iraq 3 times, 1997, 1998, and 2001. And I witnessed the genocide of Hillary Clinton's advocacy of Bill Clinton's sanctions, the total blockade, naval blockade of Iraq, where food, medicine, the means of a civilian infrastructure were kept out, of over 1 million people who died under Bill Clinton's term. Of course, George Bush Sr. was responsible for the bombing, but the sanctions regime was maintained by Bill Clinton. Madeleine Albright was the Secretary of State. She said on television that the death of 500,000 children in Iraq was worth the price for what they were doing to Iraq. And that's the woman that Hillary Clinton touted as her friend, the one who said that whoever votes against Hillary Clinton and for Bernie Sanders, there's a place in hell for them. I saw in the hospitals myself. I made a documentary of little babies, virtual skeletons, or dying because of parasites or hunger, and the mothers and the fathers also dying from a lack of medicine. I saw that genocide, and I say, Madeleine Albright is a war criminal. She's a war criminal also because of the bombing of Yugoslavia, where I was too. I saw a 15-year-old girl paralyzed from the waist down because she was hit by cluster bombs. It's a miracle she survived. Or we walked into a hospital room where a young woman, they put the sheet over her head. She had just died by U.S. NATO bombings. This is what Hillary Clinton represents. So no, Hillary Clinton is not my sister. She talked about being an abuela, you know, Spanish for grandmother. No, she's against the grandmothers that she advocates deporting, and those grandchildren that she said should be returned back to Central America.
She even touts in her book how she convinced Bill to bomb Yugoslavia. It's apparently a pillar of pride for her.
Yes.
Gloria, this election is all about fear of Trump, but it seems like every 4 years it gets worse. It gets more about rejecting the other, all about the politics of fear. Building a wall, right? There's already a wall. Mass deportations, there's already mass deportations by the Democratic Party. Why should we not be afraid? And why should we vote with our conscience?
Because we only have to look back for young people like yourself who do remember the victory of Barack Obama in 2008. But that era of Bush continued. Really, I think this last 35 years of Reaganism, of war, of the gutting of the social net, eliminating housing as a right, and so much more, has been followed by every president since, in different forms, but essentially the same. It's led us to the greatest poverty, the greatest gap between rich and poor. The Democratic Party, in fact, in history, has played the role of ameliorating, of co-opting movements, of telling people, but we're the Democrats. You voted for us. As if that's the only political practice that we can engage in is to just go into a voting booth. And we say, after these elections and after the inauguration, and in fact on the day of inauguration 2017, we must be in the streets. That's where the change will come.